In this video, I want to show you how we can create a minimap in Unity and how to make it show only the floor that we are on and not the entire building. Hi, I'm Peter and welcome to Sunny Valley Studio Tutorials. Before we start, this project was created using the built-in rendering pipeline, and some things connected to the shaders mostly will need some tweaking to work with other pipelines, but the general way to create this minimap will work everywhere. You can learn more about using shaders in Unity by visiting Jetali channel, the link will be in the description. Okay, here is my starter project. I have used Abandoned Asylum, Asset Pack and Standard Assets, First Person Controller. Those are free assets from Unity Asset Store. You can find the links in the description. And the point is that it has multiple levels so that we can create a camera that will only show the specific floor where our player currently is. And if I press play, you'll see that I have a simple character controller and a map, and I can move around from one floor to the other, and I want to create a minimap that will show me the rooms around and what is going on, as well as the player itself. Okay, so the easiest way to create our minimap is simply to create a new camera that will view our level from the top-down perspective so that we can see what is going on around our player. So let's start. Let's go to the hierarchy, right-click, create a new empty game object. Let's call it a minimap, since this will have all the components necessary to create our minimap, and we will be able to easily create a prefab from it to reuse it somewhere else. So right click on this and select camera. Now if your screen, your game view has changed, that's okay, because now it is showing what our new camera sees. Let's call it a minimap camera. Okay, so the idea is that we want this camera to look from the top-down perspective onto our level. So what I want to do is go to the transform of my new camera, and let's set the rotation to 90 on X so that it views the level from the top. Now I will select in the scene view my camera, and I will use the move tool to drag it up. Okay, and you can see here is our camera. Let me set this Y value to be 13.4 for example, and now I want to also set the camera settings, the clear flag to be a solid color. I will leave the background color as is because we are never going to see it, and we want to also set the projection to be orthographic so that we can more easily see what is going on. And let me check this, set the size to be 10 for example, so we see a bit more on our map. You can tweak those settings. This is the basic setup that we want to have. Now I can see that my player is somewhere here, so let me drag our camera here, and we are going to see first problem. Right now we are seeing the top floor, but what I would like the camera to see is only the bottom floor where our character currently is, and when it is moving around when it moves up, I want the camera to only see the top floor. So how can we go about it? Now I'm pretty sure that there are many ways, but the easiest one that doesn't require us to create new assets for our game is to select our minimap camera. And what we have here in the camera setting is the near and far clipping planes, and both of those creates the camera frustum that allows us to basically define what our camera sees. If we slide it away, you can see that this big rectangular shape that is near our camera is depicting our camera frustum. If we set, for example, our near clipping plane to 10, as you can see, it now only sees, let me set the coordinates on in the scene view to be, let me click on the z-axis and let me click on this front so that I can see in the orthographic view in the scene view. And as you can see, this camera frustum, this near clipping plane, is just below the second level. So basically what it does, it hides all the objects that are above it, but we also see all the objects below the far clipping plane, which is very far. As you can see, this is here. So what we can do is also set the far clipping plane to something like 13 or As you can see, we are not seeing the floor now, right now, so let's increase it to 14, and now this should be good. So the idea is that now if we move our camera with our character, the farther the character goes, the more we are going to see of the second level, and if we go down, we are going to again see only the bottom level. And we can of course create a transition when we go up the stairs, or we can keep it constant so that our character, when it is moving, our camera will be moving with our character, and that's what we are going to do. Let me reset the y-axis of the camera to be 13.4, and this will be my default offset that I want to keep for my camera. Of course, you can lower the camera and set the near and far clipping plane to suit your needs. Now to go back to viewing our main camera in our game view, we need to set the minimap camera target the display in the inspector to be display 2, for example. So we are back with our main camera, and now we want to render what our minimap camera sees on a texture that we are going to show in our main camera. So to do that, we need to go to our assets in the projects. Let's right click, create a new folder, and I will call it minimap. Okay. And inside this minimap folder, right click, create, and in the middle of the create menu you should see this render texture. Let's create it, let's call it minimap render texture. Okay, and here we can define the size to increase the number of details that we are going to show, but basically those default settings are good enough. And now we need to go back to our hierarchy, select our minimap camera, and we can specify to which target texture our minimap camera will send the information of what it sees. So that's what we are going to do. We're going to assign this target texture in the inspector. Let's click here, and we should only see this minimap render texture that we have created, and our minimap texture will contain what minimap camera sees. Now we want to display it in our game. So to do this, right click in our minimap camera, select UI, and I'm going to select canvas, and in the canvas I will set the UI scale mode in the inspector to be scale with screen size 1920 by 1080, so our minimap will scale with our resolution that we are using. And in here in the canvas, right click, and we are going to select UI and select image. So first will be the image that we are going to use as a parent for our minimap. And I will use in the assets, I have this minimap sprite that is just a circle, and a minimap pointer that I will use to display our player on our minimap. There will be a link to a Google Drive where you can download both of those images. Basically, I want to select our image and drag our minimap as the source image of our UI image. I will select this image in the inspector, select the anchor point, and I will hold Alt and Shift, and I will place it in the bottom right corner. Okay, I want this to be a bit bigger, so I will set it to be width 400 and height 400. I will uncheck the raycast target in the image settings, and I will, well, let's leave the maskable to be on, and I will set the preserve aspect ratio so it is always a circle. Now, I want to also set position X to be -20, and the position Y to be 20, so that we have a bit of an offset from the corner. Now inside this image I will want to create our texture, so I want to render this texture from our camera, our top-down camera, to represent our minimap. But before we can do that, we are going to need to ensure that our image is not a rectangle but rather a circle. So inside this image parent we are going to right click, create UI, and select another image, and this will be mask. Okay, so to make sure that it is a mask, we are going to again select our asset minimap, so a circle, as a image source image, and I will add here a component called mask, and this will be the mask that will be applied on top of our render texture. So to place our render texture inside our mask, right click here on this mask and select UI and select a raw image. And now this will be the image that will represent our minimap. So let's type minimap raw image. Now let's go back to our minimap and let's drag our minimap render texture into the raw image component of our minimap raw image game object as the texture. And now we should see that this is a circle, but it is a very small circle. So let's go back to our image. So this is actually a parent of our minimap. Okay. And let me add to this a component called horizontal layout group. And this will allow us to center our mask with our raw image and ensure that it is a correct size. So let's select our horizontal layout group. Let's expand padding and let's add 5, 5, 5, 5 everywhere to the left, right, top, bottom. Let's ensure that the control child size is set on width and height. And we are going to set the child alignment to be in the middle center. Now, last thing that we need to do is go to our Minimap raw image, select our rect transform in the anchor position. Let's hold Alt and Shift, and let's select this bottom right setting to make sure that we enlarge this image to take the whole image of our minimap. And now, as you can see, we have our minimap. And to improve how it looks, we can select our mask and the image and set the color to be something like black. So now it looks a bit better. And the minimap parent, let's set the color to be a bit transparent. So the alpha of the color to be something like 0.5. And now if we press play, the camera will not follow us, but we are going to see in our corner that now our player moves around, so we have our minimap. So last thing that we need to do is to ensure that it follows our player where we are when we are moving our character. Now there might be an issue. For me, it is that I'm using the new input system that came in with the preset for the first-person controller, and the event system uses the standard input module for the old input system. So we need to click this replace with input module for the new UI input system, or we can simply delete it. In any case, this will now work. So let's focus on making sure that our minimap camera follows our player. So let me go to our scripts folder where I will create my scripts. So right click, create a new C# script, and let's call first one minimap settings. And the second script will be, let's create a second one, let's call it minimap camera follow. So the idea is that I'm going to place the minimap settings on the minimap parent game object and the minimap camera follow on the camera itself, so minimap camera. So now all I need to do is set the settings in the minimap settings. I do not need to open this prefab, and this will affect how our camera will follow our player. So this is just for the convenience. Let me open the minimap settings in Visual Studio. Okay. And all I need to do here is have two fields, public transform target to follow and public bool rotate with the target true. So this will mean that my camera will face the same way that my player is facing. So just for the sake of convenience, but you may want to disable it and have the camera be static and only the player rotate on your minimap. So this is it for our minimap settings. Let's go back to Unity. Okay, I will select the minimap, and what I want to assign is my player capsule. So this is the object that is moving around, but it is not being rotated up and down. It only rotates right and left and right. So this will be very useful for me to make sure that my camera also rotates only left and right. Now let's open the minimap camera follow script. Okay, let me paste the code here that we are going to use. So first we are going to have two private fields, serialized field private minimap settings and serialized field private float camera height. Now this camera height will be set in the awake. We're going to access settings by calling a get component in parent minimap settings, and camera height equals transform.position.y. So this is 13.4 that we have set for our camera. Basically this will be the offset. In our project the player will be about with the y value of its transform to be about 0. So this will be the offset, but of course this is something that you may want to calculate for your own needs, like subtracting the player position from your camera height or whatever you need to do. And next we are going to have a void update function that will first get vector3 target position. It will be simply settings.target to follow transform position. If we have this position, we can set the camera position by simply calling transform.position equals new vector3, and we are going to call target position.x target position.y plus the camera height or our camera offset basically, and target position.z. So this will make our camera stay above our player and follow it around. Now, if in our settings we have the rotate with the target set to be true, this will mean that we also want to rotate our camera with our player. So for simplicity, I have used quaternion target rotation equals settings dot target to follow transform rotation, and I'm setting the transform dot rotation to be equal to quaternion dot Euler, and I keep the 90 degrees rotation so we have the camera in a top down view. Target rotation dot Euler angles dot y is the rotation on y, so this will mean that our camera is facing the same direction as our player, and 0 on z because we do not want any rotation on z axis. And basically this is the whole script that will allow our camera to follow our player. Let's save it, let's go back to Unity. Great. So now we should be able to press play. We are going to see that now we can move up the stairs, and our camera view, our mini camera view, will start showing us the top floor and not the bottom floor. Now there is one issue, that our camera, our new camera, has an audio listener, so the Unity is reporting us this, but also that we have our player that is barely visible because our map is very dark. And this is meant to be because I want to show you how we can tweak our map to look a bit better, to show us a bit more, so how we can swap our shaders for our map to our unlist shader so we can see whole map without all the lights and all the shadows. So let's stop our game, and first thing that we need to fix is select our minimap camera and remove the audio listener because we already have one in our main camera. What is important is now that we want to make our player stand out in our map. And to do this, what we can do is we can use on our camera a setting called culling mask. So for us, our culling mask is set to show the selected layers. And I have added the minimap layer, so you can go to the top right corner of Unity, edit layers, and I want you to select layers and add a minimap layer and the agent layer, because this will be very important for the rendering purpose of what our camera sees and what our minimap camera sees. If you have those layers, we can go to our player capsule and we want to set it to be on the layer agent. And yes, select it to change it on all the children. And now what we can do is select our minimap camera, and we can select its culling mask, and let's select nothing, and let's only select the default and the minimap. Now the default is because our Asylum assets use the default layer, so I just don't want to render our player. Instead of our player as a capsule, I want to show it as our pointer symbol that I have provided for you. And to do this, we need to go to our player capsule and we need to open it up, right click on the player and create empty game object. Let's call it minimap symbol. Okay, now make sure that the transform is reset so that it is on 0, 0, 0, and we are going to add to it a sprite render. And inside the sprite render, we are going to assign as the sprite our minimap pointer. Now in our scene view, we are going to see that it is pointing up. So we want to rotate it. And again, this will be on x-axis. Make sure that in the inspector you set the rotation on x-axis to be 90. And now our pointer or our symbol of our minimap should be pointing correctly. It is a bit too low, so let's set the y value of the transform position to be 1. And now this will be our pointer. Now the issue is that we are going to see it in our main camera view. So what we can do is select our minimap symbol, let's select the layer, and let's select it to be on the minimap layer. And now if we go to our main camera, we can select our culling mask and we can uncheck the minimap from the culling mask, so we are not going to see the pointer, but this will be pretty big. Let's click play. This is pretty big, so to ensure that it is a bit smaller, what we can do is select our minimap and let's scale it down to something like 0.3 and 0.3, and now as you can see it looks pretty good. You can also change the color to be something like green or whatever color you want to have for your minimap. And now if you press play, you are, instead of the capsule, going to see this symbol on our minimap that represents our player, and it is rotating with our camera. So basically that's what I wanted to achieve. But again, we have this issue that our map is pretty dark, and although it is showing us what we need to see, maybe we want it to show us a bit clearer image of the rooms nearby. So let's stop our game, and we can easily do it in our built-in rendering pipeline. In the other pipelines it will be a bit different, but what we can do is go to our scripts folder, right click, create a C# script, and let's call it camera replace shader script. So basically the idea is that it is all about what we want to see in our minimap camera and what we do not want to see. As I have shown you with the calling mask, we can include or exclude some parts of our level, but basically it is all about creating custom shaders and assigning them correct values, because right now what we can do is we can make sure that our minimap camera is rendering all the asylum assets using a different shader, an unlit shader that will not show the light or the shadows. So to do this, we need to open our camera replace shader script. Okay, and here, instead of start and update, I will paste the code. We are going to have a serialized field private camera target camera, and in the start we are going to call target camera set replacement shader. And if you go to the documentation, again, this is specific to the built-in rendering pipeline. It allows us to make the camera render objects with a replacement shader instead of their original shader. And we can see that there is a rendering with replaced shader article here that shows us that what we need to provide is the shader that we want to use instead of the original one, and the tag inside the shader that we want to use. So usually default shaders, or all the default shaders in Unity, has this tag in it, render type opaque or transparent or whatever. So if we have a custom shaders, we can provide our specific tag and specify what types of objects do we want to actually render. Okay, so in our case, I want to substitute our default shaders with a unlit color shader. So I'll call shader.find, and I will type unlit color, and I want to use this tag render type that all the standard shaders has on them. Okay, so with this done, let's save this script, let's go back to Unity. And now we need to assign to our minimap, let's assign camera replacement shader script. So now we have our target camera, I'm going to assign minimap camera. And if I now press play, we are going to see that our minimap looks a bit different. Everything is now white. So this is a bit of an issue, and this is because all the shaders in our game were replaced with our unlit color shader. So what we can do is go to our assets, right click, let's create a new material, and let's call this our player minimap symbol material. Okay, let's assign it to our minimap symbol, and instead of tweaking the color in our sprite render, we are going to set it to be white, and instead we are going to set the albedo to be green in our material. So now again our symbol is green, but now if we press play, it should stay green because the color is assigned. Okay, as you can see, it all works, but again, this is pretty bright for a dark game. So what we can do finally is to select our minimap raw image, let's select the color, and let's decrease its alpha value. So now if we press play, we're going to see that this is not as bright, and now we can see what is going on in our minimap, and we can also see all the rooms around our map. Now this is optional, and again, for the other pipelines you would have to find a solution that uses a custom I think the forward renderer that will apply this material or shader change for your objects in your game. If you find this tutorial useful, leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, it really helps me a lot. Thanks a lot for watching, take care.